his presentation. So I'm going to make sure everybody is muted and we'll introduce Andy and say hi. Take it away, Andy.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to talk to the group. It's a great honor. It's been quite a few years since I last did it, and that time was in person, so sadly this isn't, but I hope I'll still make it fun for you. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to show you. So anyway, first of all, welcome to my very glamorous laundry room. So this is actually, funnily enough, the one room in my house where I don't make artwork, but I have my computer in here and I have some storage in here, and it's the best computer to do Zooms. So it's the best internet in the house. So that's why I'm in the laundry room. So my presentation today is going to be about the pandemic and what happened to me and how I adjusted to that and how I changed my art making practice and what I did during those months, which we're, still in, I suppose. And so it's actually, ironically, been a very fertile time for me work-wise, a very productive time. And I was able to sort of really focus in on what I wanted to do and try some new things. And some of the, the hustle and bustle of ordinary life stopped, and I was able to sort of really go into my studio and make a lot of work. So I'm going to talk about that and talk about what I made and why I made it. And I do really want people to chime in if they want to, in terms of asking questions. I know we're going to stop at the end for some questions, but if somebody does have something they want me to stop and explain a little bit more, then I would really enjoy that, because I think that's how you get the most interaction and interesting insight into things. So anyway, to give you a very authentic experience, I decided deliberately not to shave and to wear an old tatty t-shirt, because that gives you the real pandemic experience of what it was really like. I could have shaved and worn a shirt, but that wouldn't have been the pandemic.
You look great, Andy. You look great.
Okay, thank you. So this is the PowerPoint. Can everybody see the screen? Is it all good?
We can see you right now.
Oh, you can. Oh, I need to press the share screen. Okay, let me do that. All righty. So let's see. How is that?
Oh, we're good. You might want to do the green dot in the upper left. I think will make it full screen.
Absolutely. Now I've got all of the pictures of you guys here. How do can I minimize that? Yeah, there we go. So is that good? Is that you can see?
Yeah, and then you're going to start the slideshow, right?
Great. Yep, I'm going to click through myself. So Bobby, if you can help me keep an eye on time, that would be really helpful.
All right, and I just want to say we'll save the last 10 minutes for comments, questions, people asking, and I'll let you know. And Sherry, is this full screen that he has it, or?
Without seeing his computer, I really can't. But when he presses his,
he needs to go to slideshow.
Yeah, and then it should be full screen.
Okay. Let me see where that is.
We did this yesterday just perfectly, didn't we?
It says slideshow.
View slideshow.
Perfect.
Good?
Yes.
Okay. So here we go. Making artwork during a pandemic, a presentation for Paperworks, Thursday night, September 2021. So let me give you a little bit of background, what I've been doing. It's interesting. I'm an artist that has to do lots of different things. Some of you will understand that. Some of you will be very much more focused on the one thing that you love. But I do a lot of different things. It sometimes confuses people. But to me, that's what being an artist is about. I follow all my different passions, and that includes some representational artwork. It includes a lot of abstract artwork. I do oil paintings. I do work on paper, gouache, watercolor. I go out drawing. I draw at home, and I do a lot of photography. As Bobby said, I've also been doing printmaking, And another thing that I do, I have a publishing company and I publish photography books of other artists. So before the pandemic, the couple of years before the pandemic, it was an extraordinarily busy time for me. I was traveling a lot for exhibitions and also for book fairs. And I was publishing books. My company published about 15 books in 3 years. And it was a very exciting time. And we were going to all sorts of prestigious book fairs as well as art fairs. So I was doing Art Miami, Basel, and Art New York, but also Paris Photography Fair in New York, all those things. So it was extraordinarily exciting. And then the pandemic came and everything got canceled. And I lost a lot of money in terms of all the books I'd been publishing because I wasn't able to sell them. And all the exhibitions I had planned were canceled. And I just had to take the opportunity to go back into myself and use it as a positive to make artwork. So one of the first things I did was I decided to just make tiny little work because I love making tiny things. And I made a series of about 30 small gouache paintings in the style of the modernist architecture that I've been doing. So often these images are found images online, but I then create all the color and I take things out, put things in, move things around, add all the furniture. So I change everything. So I start with something that I found, but then it becomes entirely different. So here on this first slide is a selection of 6 little gouache paintings. And when I say little, they're on 5x7 watercolor paper. I actually found some really lovely handmade Japanese watercolor paper online. And I bought, a couple of boxes of 50 sheets. So there's the first 6 paintings. Then here's another set. And on the bottom right, there's a couple of Tucson images as well. And these are generally from my own photographs, which I take. And then I really heighten the color and play with the light. And a lot of it is invented. So I'll take a real image, but then, I want to take things out that I don't want and put things in that I do want, or move things along to the right place where I want them. So for instance, in this image in the top left, all that furniture is invented and everything inside's invented, the plant, the trees, all of it. It's a real house, but everything else is invented. So that was a big project that kept me going probably for 2 or 3 months. I did about 30 paintings in that time. And often I would paint without doing a drawing first. So I would build the painting very, very slowly with blocks of color and keep changing it until I got the right, because that gives a certain looseness when you don't start with a drawing. Anyway, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this was my second pandemic project, which was I decided to organize my studio. So this studio is out back at the back of my house, and I built it in 2011, just before my son was born. And I love it. I'm in there, almost every day. And I have a ton of paints and collage materials, and it became impossible to find everything. I'm also a bit of a hoarder, and I've collected all my archive from my childhood, every single ticket stub and concert brochure, everything I've ever done or been to, I have, or every letter, every postcard. So I have a big archive. So I decided to organize everything during the pandemic. And that big shelving unit, which I had made for me by a neighbor, he does steel shelves. I joked with people that in the event of a nuclear war, that's about the only thing that will survive in my house. It's not going anywhere. So anyway, and this is a pre-pandemic project, but I wanted to show it to you because it's relevant to other work that I made during the pandemic. So I had been to an Agnes Martin show about 5 years ago in London at the Tate Gallery, and I love her work. And, abstraction is a big thing in England. Funnily enough, it's not easy to sell abstract work in England, but it's very popular in terms of our modernist art history in the UK. And you have an artist like Bridget Riley, who's very much a hard-edged abstract painter. But I love Agnes Martin and her work. And this body of work was inspired by Agnes Martin. So I wanted to work on a grid. These are all tiny gouache paintings that are, skipped ahead, that were from pages in a sketchbook. So I had a little sketchbook, and I painted about 50 of these paintings. And I call them paintings, but in a way they're drawings. I don't know if anybody's familiar with them, I used Posca acrylic pens. So they are acrylic paint, but they're kind of like a gouache acrylic paint in a pen form. And they're quite tricky to use. They're very scratchy. So I had to really be patient with the way I built up the surfaces. But I was really happy with them, and I hope to publish this at some point because it's an entire sketchbook with about 50 paintings in. And so another thing that happened with me was thinking a lot about abstraction. And one of the issues with abstraction is you kind of feel every time you make an abstract work that you have to reinvent the wheel. So it's good to put some criteria and limitations down. And I thought, what if I restrict myself to making a 4x4 grid of 16 squares, and then every composition I start with that, and that decision's already been made, and then I can play within that. I can play with the colors I use, I can play with the shapes, I can play with repetition and rhythm, but that structure is already laid down, and that helps me get started. So I found that incredibly helpful for that body of work, and I worked on it maybe for a year. So back in the studio, the beginning of the pandemic, I finished those little gouache modernist architecture paintings, and I wanted to do something bigger that was freer, that would allow me to free up. And so I got a giant roll, it was actually a birthday present from my friend, a giant roll of watercolor, very high quality watercolor paper. And I tacked it up on the studio wall. I did 2 of these large scale paintings. They're about 5 or 6 foot wide. And they're using acrylic paint and mediums, various acrylic media, a lot of gels and micaceous iron oxide. And so they're actually built up in a lot of layers. Often the paint is quite thin, and then I'll paint 2 or 3 layers, and working on a lot of textures within the painting. But I worked at it freeform. I had no preconceived notion of what I wanted to do. I wanted it just to be an ideas board. And in the end, I feel like they did come together as paintings. I wasn't expecting them to, but I'm really, really happy with them. I haven't got them framed, partly because framing paperwork of that size is A, I'd have to put it somewhere, and B, they'd probably cost about $700 to $1,000 each to frame. So they're still rolled up in my studio, taking up space. But I was really, really happy with them at the time, and they enabled me to loosen up a little bit, even though I'm still within all that geometric squares and triangles and rectangles and all of that. Anyway, after that, I started just painting. I paint a lot of paper. And I for collage, and I play with color and play with texture, and then you'll see the paper all curls up when I tack it up. But after that, I'm able to sort of flatten it out. I put books on it and flatten it all out, and then I cut it up. And this is using a lot of metallic paint, so I'm able to get these lovely lined textures. I'll use grid paper and lined paper to paint over. I use old book paper because I love all the dog-eared nature of the paper itself. I'm much happier using old paper than new paper that I buy. So this is a sketchbook, but most of these papers are old papers that are from sheet music or old books or old vintage wrapping paper, things that I find online. Here's a couple of studio shots of me that were done for an interview that I gave. And this was fun. You get a nice shot of my bald pate there. But you can see I'm covered in, there's tons of different paints, different papers, glues. And I also was collecting metal objects from scrapyards. So I made a few sculptures during the pandemic as well. So here we get on to some of the collages I started to make. So the main thing that I did over the pandemic was, once I'd done the modernist architecture, once I'd tried those couple of big paintings, I ended up making about 300 collages with painted paper and with vintage paper and vintage ephemera. And sometimes I'll mix the two, and sometimes I will keep them very separate deliberately. So this one on the left is actually a gouache painting painted onto vintage matchbooks. And then the collage is made on a vintage linen book cover, on the inside cover of a vintage linen book. I know that's quite popular now. A lot of people are using vintage linen book covers to make as a substrate for their art. This one includes all sorts of found old papers, which I collect for years. I mean, I have boxes and boxes and boxes of found papers. This is an envelope that I bought in Moscow maybe 15 years ago. So I keep all of that. And then let's move on. So then I did something interesting. I had bought this beautiful Fabriano watercolor paper, and I loved it. I love the texture of it, and I love the deckled edges of it, but it was too white. So I started to coffee tone the paper. So every morning I'd make my coffee, then I'd put it in a flat Pyrex, and then I'd dip my paper in, and I'd leave it, say on the right-hand side, I might have only left it in for 10 minutes. And on the left-hand side, I might have left that one in overnight. So depending on how long I left it in, the paper would go darker and more warm and more yellow and more vintage looking. And then these are painted paper collages, just painted paper. Often the paper itself, as I said, is sheet music or old book paper. And I was exploring my love of early modern avant-garde art movements, such as constructivism, Russian constructivism, suprematism, mixing that with a love of pop art and a love of color. So I kind of feel like my art is a fusion of all my different interests, whether it's you know, the more austere work of the Russian constructivists, or the more pop art of post-war American art. If you know, to me, I'm mixing all of these things. It's like one great soup, and then it comes out as my own ideas and my own version. And I think this work is situated very much in the history of modernism, and it's not particularly groundbreaking. I don't pretend that it's groundbreaking, but what I'm more interested in is making work that is a very authentic vision, that feels like me, that feels genuine and authentic to who I am. And I hope that that comes across in the work. So you know, there are sometimes I look at other artists and I think, oh my God, they're much more experimental than me, or they're more, you know, they're trying new things, which I'm a little bit afraid to do. But I feel like this work is very authentic to who I am. And so it was really exciting to be able to devote all that time in the pandemic to just day after day coming into the studio and making art. So again, all these little different bits of painted paper. I started to introduce a little bit of patterning of shapes with shadows and diamonds and triangles and scratches and scratch marks. So that was really fun. This was a kind of fun period. I mean, I've just chosen a tiny selection of the work for you because, as I said, there were literally about 300 pieces. These pieces I kind of see as puzzles, you know, a little bit like the fun that you have making a puzzle in terms of the Zen quality of it and the playful quality of it, the building blocks that children use. So there's a lot of playfulness in the work, but I'm trying to mix the playfulness with a kind of sophistication of image making and the formal elements. So again, these are painted paper and collage. And I like the fact that they're both paintings and collages. They're not one or the other, they're both. You know, I've always been interested, for instance, in the work of Jasper Johns, who crosses boundaries. And you have to ask yourself, well, what is that? Is that, you know, the famous painting of the flag? Is that a painting or a collage? It's both. Is it a representation of a flag or a flag itself? It's both. So I'm interested in how artwork plays with language and plays with the grammar of what we're looking at, you know, ask questions about what we're looking at and how we represent the visual world around us. Here's a couple more. So these are both on the watercolor paper that I was coffee toning. The one on the left, I've covered the whole page, but usually I leave a border. And I like all these sort of stains and marks. I think they make the artwork more interesting. I'm not so interested in making things that look pristine. Often my rectangles are all wobbly and squiggly, and I don't mind that. To me, that makes it much more interesting. Here's some more of the painting. You can see I'm playing with textures, and often these are offcuts. So one of the things about being a hoarder is I never throw anything away. Now, no matter how tiny the piece of paper it is, I keep it, and it goes into another pile with the tiny, tiny offcuts and the messy bits. And sometimes I'll find that I'll paint paper for days, and then I'll only make collages from the tiny offcuts, the discards, which is bizarre. And then I'll be left with all the beautiful pristine sheets of paper, and they'll just sit there for years because the paper that gets used is all the scrap stuff that's discarded and falls on the floor. And these are nice with the, you know, bits of accidental splashes of paint. And then you get words from the music, the sheet music, which is really fun. And these, again, these are only 5x7. They're all quite tall. Maybe they're 6x8 actually, this paper. I have some here in person, which I can show you after the presentation. This one's interesting on the left. It includes some vintage Japanese paper. I did a trip a couple of years ago before the pandemic. I did a trip to Japan, and it was just absolutely wonderful. It was a dream come true for me, and I definitely want to go again. And they are obsessed with paper over there. And every market I went to, every city I went to, I went and searched for papers and brought a lot of paper home. So this gray texture paper in the middle is a Japanese paper. So, and then this piece on the right was just fun. It's picking a shape and then playing with repetition and color, and the handmade, hand-cut nature of it. So it's all a little bit messy and uneven, but that I think makes it really interesting. So there was another period where I put the paints away and got inks out and made a whole series of painted paper using Sennelier shellac inks. And that gives another kind of quality as well. It's a little bit more transparent. The colors are a bit more muted, and I was making some collages with some more somber autumnal colors. But to be honest, in a way, that's my favorite palettes, are these you know, weird sort of browns and sand colors and ochre colors and autumnal colors. I absolutely love making artwork with those palettes, but there are other times when I have to use bright color. So these, again, they feel like paintings, but they also feel like collages. And they're all sort of studies for work that could be made larger. And in one or two cases, I have made larger work based on these. Here is an example, actually. I made a whole series of these small collages with semicircles. This one on the left is just the 6x8 on the watercolor paper. This one is probably 22x30 on a beautiful piece of Arches, you know, French watercolor paper. So I made a much bigger collage, and that was actually more challenging because I had to hand cut all the semicircles just with scissors. And that was obviously, there was a lot of failures on that, but a lot that worked eventually. And then the gluing was quite difficult, gluing things that large. I use a liquid glue, but it's, you know, it can, at that large scale, it can get messy. And for some of these, I tried to do a spray mount glue, which I bought, and it totally didn't work. Everything peeled off after about a day or so. And I have no idea why. It was a really expensive professional spray glue, and it just didn't work. So you just have to experiment with things. These are some more of those little Sennelier ink studies. I think they're studies. I don't profess that each one is an amazing finished work. It's all about being playful, having different ideas, moving on the sort of discussion, as it were, inside my head. And I'm playing a lot with rhythm and shape and space. And to me, painting, essentially, whether it's figurative or abstract, is all about the illusion of space and representing the world and what we see visually around us. And you know, everywhere we go, we see geometry, we see doors and windows and pavements and buildings. And those are what attract me. I mean, which isn't to say I don't love organic matter and flowers and all of that, but I do a lot of that in my photography, actually. But when it comes to making art, my brain works in a way that's fascinated with geometry and space and shape and form that's created by geometric structures. Now, these were interesting. These are really tiny collages, even smaller than the others. And this one over here uses a lot of linens, which I painted over with metallic paints, and then I scratched into. And there's a lot of different old book linens in this collage, and they're very intricate and very tiny. I mean, this one might only be 4 by 5 inches, and they take a long time. But I did a whole series of about 20 of them, and I'm really excited by them. This actually might be my favorite collage that I made in the whole 18 months of the pandemic. I just think it's really pleasing to me, and the colors and the shapes. And I used some old faux wood paper that I bought in Japan. And you know, there's a whole mixture of really old book linens and vintage paper envelopes, the insides of old envelopes. That was one of the Russian envelopes I'd bought in Moscow. It's got a gorgeous little pattern on it. And again, more of these kind of, you know, making collage, you also sort of can't help but explore the history of collage. And, you know, the history of collage goes back to Cubism and Braque and Picasso, because they actually literally incorporated found objects, newspapers and faux wood and rope into their paintings. So it's about playing a game with what's real and what's a simulation of the real world. So it's a semiotic game about the meaning of things and the meaning of signs and symbols and reality. So I love the history of collage and how it has impacted so much on modern art and contemporary art. And you then have Dada and Bauhaus, and my favorite artist is the German collage artist Kurt Schwitters. And he was the first artist to really use found ephemera in his work in a very sort of overwhelming way, which became a whole world in itself. And they're exquisitely sublime compositions using the most mundane, quotidian, discarded, found pieces of paper that you can imagine. So here's an example of me using the most discarded little offcuts that I can find from my collection and making, you know, hopefully making something beautiful out of it. So these are really my favorite collages of all. Here's another one using found paper and striped paper and painted paper and, you know, stains. There's shellac stains on these pieces. And then sometimes I'll get really sort of simple and geometric, and I'm also very interested in Mondrian, how Mondrian, you know, started by drawing the outside world and then reduced everything to the horizontal and the vertical and simple grid shapes. And I love that simplicity. I love reduction. So, you know, these collages were really fun. I used a lot of mat board from the framer. So I would go down to my framer and she would give me all the offcuts from her mat board, and then I would use that to make the collage on. And again, I sort of paint the paper in such a way that it has texture on it. So it has kind of wood texture or fabric texture on it. And then this one is very influenced by Kurt Schwitters. You can see, again, it's all really old ephemera that I've collected over the last 20, 30 years. And here's just an example of a framed piece. So that, you know, they change a lot when they're framed as well, quite nice. And then I started playing with painting shapes and circles and letters and cutting them up. So they're collages within collages and paintings within paintings. Here I'm going back to something, this is a piece I made pre-pandemic, which is an acrylic painting, but it's painted in a way that's like a screen print. So I paint and then I take the paint off, I remove the paint, and you get these transparent layers and they kind of look like prints. So they are kind of printmaking as well, because there is a level of pressing onto the paper and removing the paint. But the shapes, the triangle shapes and mountain shapes recur in my work. So these two pieces might have been made 2 years apart, but they have elements, recurring elements. This is with found paper. These are the inside of old books, and this was an old silver shopping bag that I'd got years ago and kept. So how am I doing for time? I think I'm okay. I've still got a few minutes left. Here's some paintings that I did. Again, just really just little studies. This is acrylic painting on mat board, and allowing the very thin glazes, allowing the mess, allowing the incisions and lines and drawing to be a part of it. This is a collage painting. So for a whole week, I painted sort of ghosts of circles with acrylic in different colors, and then cut them up and created a collage out of them. And again, usually there are like 5 or 6 more of these types of paintings, but I'm only showing you, one. I couldn't show you everything, but I just picked one of each just to show you the variety and diversity in what I've been doing. Here's a collage which I love, which I made from really the torn insides of the book linen. And so the more beat up something is, the more faded, the more disposable it looks like it should be, the more I love it in terms of making art with it. And then this was a piece that I did for the Black Lives Matter movement that day, when the Instagram made all the screens black, and I decided to make something positive, to make an artwork out of it. And I've always loved the American poet Langston Hughes. And I don't know if you remember that picture at the beginning, which I showed you of my crates in the studio. There's an old typewriter there, and it doesn't really work very well, but I wrote out a Langston Hughes poem with the old typewriter and made a little abstract collage making in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. These are little linen book cover collages, very minimal, very abstract. Again, sort of my interest in Rothko and Agnes Martin and Barnett Newman and the post-war abstract expressionist artists of that time. Now, this was something fun. This was based on the 4x4 grids that I'd been doing earlier. This was pre-pandemic, I made a screen print with a company called Cream downtown, and I commissioned them to help me make it. And we built the image together, and then we chose all the colors together, and then they made that screen print, and I did an edition. I think it's a small edition of 30 or 50. And then I was also contacted by a woman in Texas who makes swimwear for people who are very sensitive to UV light, sunlight. So she uses a special fabric to make the swimwear to protect the skin from the sunlight. So she asked me if she could license one of my images to use in the swimwear. So that was fun. I did a little licensing deal there, and she made some swimwear out of one of my designs. And then I'm going to show you a few commercial projects that I've done. During the pandemic, I was contacted by Imagery Estate Winery in California, in Sonoma, and they asked me if I would design a wine label for them. So I did this little painted collage. They wanted something of the modernist houses, but at that time I wanted to make a collage, so I combined the two. And here's something fun. The only requirement was that their logo was in the image, and their logo happens to be the Greek portico with the 4 columns. And I was thinking to myself, well, God, how do I get a classical Greek architecture into mid-century modern architecture? Well, it occurred to me that I could use one of the, Wexler zigzag roofs, which is symbolic of mid-century architecture. And then I added the 4 columns in there. So I've sort of melded classical with mid-century. Anyway, they loved it, and that's the wine that they made, the wine bottle that they made. And then, funnily enough, I went one day last year to get my US citizenship. I became a citizen, and I did it all in one day at because they, because of COVID, they did the ceremony in the same day as the test. And I returned home to 6 crates of wine. So it was a good day. I became a citizen and got 60 bottles of wine. So that was really fun. Now, this was the actual sketchbook where I made all those little gouache paintings. And then a friend of mine in London has a design company and wanted to use the images to make some products. So he made some beautiful porcelain mugs using my designs. And wants to launch an entire range of stuff using my work. He made a notebook, there's a tea towel, there are tea lights, leather coasters, a leather clutch bag, and a hat. So all these using my collage, which was really fun and flattering. Here's something I just put in for a little bit of fun. I have a friend who's a ceramicist, and I actually went during the pandemic and did some ceramics, some fun little ceramics in her studio. I'm not a ceramicist by any means, but that was fun playing with ceramics. And then because I'm very into bookmaking, this isn't handmade, but it's, we did get it hand sewn. I made with the help of a graphic designer, I made a little brochure of my collage paintings that I'd done during the pandemic. And this is a 32-page brochure, and it's really lovely. I'm really, really proud of it. I'm going to stop in a minute. I made a few, this is just one of the little found object pieces that I made. So they're sort of sculptural and collage based, and they're all little rusty things that I find in I'll go down to South Tucson behind the airport, or little, disused building sites, and I pick up all sorts of found objects and make collage out of them. This one is paper and card, but it's a little bit sculptural. It's thicker than some of the other collages, and it's made on a panel. And then just to reiterate, so I never stop drawing. Even when I'm making the abstract work, I'm always still doing my drawings. These are some pen drawings, which I'm hoping to exhibit in Chicago next year at the Chicago Expo. And these are the modernist house drawings where, as I say, I find an image, but a lot of this is invented. This and the extra room. I'll take something, but I'll completely reinvent it. And these are painted with these are drawn with these lovely Japanese Signo pens, which I get online. And they're very, very thin. They're 0.38. So they're tiny nibs, but they allow me to do sort of lovely cross hatching. And then one last main thing that I want to talk about, I have been commissioned. It's an ongoing project, and it's a fabulous commission. It's going to take about a year. I've been commissioned by a hospital in London, a major teaching hospital called the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And they have asked me to make all of the artwork for a brand new intensive care neonatal unit in the hospital that's just been built. And it's a long commission that involves a lot of meetings with all the people who work in the hospital unit, because they want them to have a say in the artwork that's made, that's going to be put on the walls. So they are not actually buying the original artwork. I'm producing the artwork. They are going to get digital files, and they are going to make large scale wall vinyls, which will be put all over the ward. And the idea is to be, inspiring and peaceful and fun for the people who are in a pretty stressful situation, new parents whose little babies are in the intensive care unit. So I made 4 studies for them, first of all. And an interesting anecdote, something's gone wrong, is that they loved all 4 of them, but they can't use any of them. And they've said the reason why they can't use these 2 is because they gave me the images to use, which were of local pubs. But then when I made these images, these are pubs where the staff go to work at night, go after work to relax and have a drink. But then they said, "Oh, we're really sorry. We've realized we can't use images of pubs which connote drinking in a neonatal intensive care unit. So I'd already made the artwork. So I said, okay, I'm going to make you new artwork. Never mind. So that was unfortunate. And then they asked me to make images with very muted palettes, which I did. And then they came back and the feedback was, we love them, but we need them brighter. So I am remaking the artwork, and this is the one I've just made for them. So hopefully I'm going to present this to them next week, and hopefully they're going to absolutely love it. So much brighter and more playful. So hopefully that will be accepted. And then this is just little playful stuff that I'm always doing, little bits and pieces of an evening when don't want to do some major artwork. I might just work on some little watercolors. These are tiny little watercolor sketches, or his drawing of my kitchen, which I did the other night just for fun, to try and get back into drawing as a still life painting. And then this is a little long-term project that I'm doing, which is a little illustrated guidebook to Tucson, which I have started and might take me a year or two to do. And I believe that's it. So
Andy, that's amazing. You have so much work there.
that's just a fraction of it.
I know it is. And I'm just wondering, would you be able to access those matchbook photos? I didn't see any in there, but you've done such great collages with the matchbook covers. I remember you showed that years ago at the meeting. I was blown away by that.
We could go onto my website, but I
Okay,
don't know.
all right, we'll do that.
Do you want to do that? Okay.
Well, yeah, maybe later we'll feature that. But I want to open it up now to.
How do I get back to seeing people's
faces?
Everybody, yeah.
We could stop your screen share.
Yeah.
I think just let's see.
That's
there we go. Okay.
Well, I hope that wasn't too long.
No, not at all. We have plenty of time. So,
great.
Okay, so isn't he great? I love it. So if you want to,
Thank you.
say something to Andy, why don't you unmute yourself and ask away, Andy, what, about his work, and let's do that.
Questions.
Who would like to ask Andy a question or comment? I have a comment here in the chat. It says, example of a synchronicity. I went to a site called Workshop to find a jigsaw puzzle from someone I follow on Instagram named Claire Youngs. And on our artist page, I noticed an artist from Tucson. So I clicked through and found Andrew's puzzle, which she also ordered. And that's Sue Agnew. So
I forgot to include that in the presentation. I was going to try and do all of the different things, and that skipped my mind. So thank you for mentioning that.
I have a comment. Hi,
Yes.
go ahead,
Andy.
Sherry.
Who am I speaking to? I can't see everybody.
Sherry
Pasternak.
Pasternak.
Hello, Sherry. Long time no see.
I know, absolutely. I just wanted to comment that besides the amazing breadth and depth of your work over the last couple of years, you are so articulate and able to explain things in a way that we totally understand and we get it. And so you're a wonderful, wonderful presenter as well as an amazing artist.
Oh, what a lovely thing to say. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. That's lovely. Thank you.
It's
Lovely to
very
see you,
true.
Sherry.
And Andy was expecting to do this in person, and we would have loved to have seen him in person. We could have seen artwork there too, but he graciously said he'd do it on Zoom. So we're grateful to you for doing that.
There's an example of one of the artworks in its real size, so that you can see they're pretty tiny. But this is the watercolor paper that I better over here, no, it's not great, that I tone. So that just gives you a sense of scale.
I love how you're dyeing that with coffee, the paper, and it's not perfectly white.
No.
And the marks are coming through also, the little blobs and bits and bobs.
Yeah,
with
I don't particularly like painting on white. It's pretty harsh, and it's always nice to paint on off-white, or either paint your surface initially. When I make a painting, I paint the surface initially to make it a neutral tone, either a brown or a gray, because a mid-tone is much easier to work out your lights and darks than if you're painting on white. So I recommend that.
Right.
Oh, I have one more comment for Andy.
Yes.
Many times I totally get turned off by artists who are working geometrically when the finished piece is not exactly aligned, or things tend, bleed over to other areas. And that really, really turns me off. There's something that you're doing that makes it perfectly wonderful to make things a little off, or a little faded, or a little, rather than bump, 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 exactly geometric. I don't know what it is.
Well,
but
I think it's a question of intention.
yeah,
I think one of the definitions of a good piece of artwork is when you can feel the intention of the artist and feel that they've achieved what they intended to achieve. Now that's
Yeah.
somewhat intangible thing. I'm not saying it's always easy to know that, but there a lot of artists who want to make very precise abstract work that's very geometric and very precise, but then their actual technical skills don't match up to that.
exactly.
And then you feel and see the shortfall in the work. You can't help it.
Mhm.
And they might be trying, they might be learning, they might be studying, and they might have great intentions, but there's a shortfall in the application of their skill level.
Exactly.
I'm not trying to make work that's precise. If I did, I would make it very precise, believe me, but I'm not trying to. So you can see that the intention of the work is to be more handmade, is to be loose, is to allow the rough edges, is to allow all the mistakes, the splashes, the cuts, the tears, the spills. Those are the things that make the work very human.
Yes.
And very approachable and very evocative,
Mhm.
because we actually then connect with the texture and the surface and the age and the patina of those things. It's like when I go out to take photographs, I am obsessed by what the Japanese called wabi-sabi. I'm sure most of you know that concept, wabi-sabi, the idea of things which are imperfect, old, peeling paint, rusting doors. I've no idea why I'm so attracted to that and so drawn to it. I'm not the only one, it's a thing. But, my work, I think, tries to play with that as well. So I'm most happy when my work is messy. I'm most dissatisfied when I've made it too clean and neat. And I think, God, it's actually a little bit boring. I wish I could have made it messier.
Great explanation.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question. Actually more of a comment. I really appreciate, I'm Joe Anderson.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
I'm strolling along to find
Okay.
people if they're talking, so I
I
can
really
put a
appreciate
face.
speaking to the authentic vision that you spoke about. And I really saw how you carried that over from media to media. And I liked the kind of the fluidity of your flow from one media to the next, with a special interest in your ephemera. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I think it's important not to be boxed in, that's a slightly ironic phrase to use, given that my work is so much about boxes and grids. But I think that, once you're involved in the art world and you actually are doing it professionally, as I have been now for nearly 25 years, there is a tendency for galleries and collectors and curators. They all want to understand what you do. And it's much easier if you do one thing. You're the person that's known for this. And then they can put you in the right exhibition and the right curation and blah, blah, blah. They don't like it. People get very flustered if you show them a figurative drawing and an abstract collage. They're like, what the hell? How can you do both? Well, I can and I do. And if you don't like it, tough. So I think it's really important to do exactly what you want on each day that you wake up. And, you know, if I had wanted to do a more different kind of career that was just about, you know, doing the same thing, there are many careers I could have chosen. But if you choose to be an artist, you make that statement, which is a little bit of a rebellious statement about being free and about not being boxed in and about, you know, choosing what you do with your day. And maybe there's a privilege with that. Maybe there's a selfishness with that. I don't know. It could be a number of things. But one thing I do know is that I'm very miserable when I have to do what other people want me to do. And I'm very happy when I get to do what I want to do. And I feel very privileged to be in that position. And it's not easy being an artist. It's very tough to make a living, but I'm not complaining. I love what I do and I choose to do it. And I've had a good time doing it. And as tough as the pandemic was, and it was very tough in other regards, I had my little boy here, I was homeschooling for a while, and all sorts of difficult things that were going on. I couldn't see my family, as we all know. But the one saving grace was I was just able to spend 18 months in the studio making hundreds of pieces of work where it wasn't about making something for an exhibition. It wasn't about having to sell anything. I just wanted to make what I wanted to make on each and every day. And that was the first time I felt that freedom ever, really, well, since I've been at college. So it was a tremendous privilege.
Thank you.
That's
Any other
wonderful.
questions? Thank you.
Andy has offered to do collage workshop or a class for us. And I think that would be great. I think many members here would love that. So hopefully our education team, Sue and Michelle, maybe can work with Andy and we can get something set up. But I think
I
you're a
would love
great
that.
teacher and I think very inspirational it would be.
Oh, thank you.
So I love the pictures the collage and the color, the last one you showed us for the neonatal hospital. That was pretty amazing. The
Thank you.
textures and color.
Yeah, I think I'm really happy with that. I only need to do about another 6 of those.
Oh my goodness.
So we'll see. But yeah, it's a good start. We're having a Zoom meeting next Wednesday, and hopefully they'll like it. And it's it's those people who've done commissions for institutions will know that it's a complicated process. There's a lot of people that need to be pleased and a lot of different input. So it's a challenge working with a committee because they wanted to include all the staff working in the hospital to have feedback. And I think that's wonderful. And I'm appreciative of that. But it does mean that I did some work, which they asked me to do, and then they can't use it. So I have to do it again. So I'm not getting upset about it. I'm just taking it as an opportunity to do more artwork. So, you know.
Sorry, the pub didn't get in.
I know the pubs didn't get in, but somebody will like them.
Yeah, that's great.
Andy,
That was great. Thank you.
Andy, this is Vicki Donkersley. I just, what I enjoyed about your presentation, first of all, I'm blown away by the breadth and all the production that you did during the pandemic, because as you said, I think I couldn't even think straight. So I couldn't, going into trying to create something just wasn't there for a while. But I love seeing how your work, your architectural paintings and your collages, there's just this music and flow between the two, and they get more complex, and then it's like you wind them back down and go to more simplification, and then you're working with different color palettes, and it just blows me away. So thank you for sharing, and it was totally inspiring to see the work and just to hear you talk about, the artists that have inspired you as well, and that, relate to the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity. I think you make a very good observation. What happens is there's a tendency for work to get more complex. Complexity and simplicity in art is a very, very tough thing to negotiate. And I think we're all negotiating it because we all want the work to be sophisticated and technically complex. But at the same time, that adage, less is more. And so I'm constantly struggling between the work becoming more complex and then trying to edit back to make it simpler and simpler. And in a way, you have to go one direction before you can go back. You can't, it's very hard just to start with simplicity. I think, funnily enough, you know, maybe this is a kind of Zen thing. Simplicity is something you arrive at. You don't start with it. It's counterintuitive. But, and I would just reiterate that, you know, one of the, because I know you're, you know, I'm speaking to people who are artists who make things. But we all have creative blocks. There are times when I have creative blocks. I know it doesn't seem like that, but one of the things I'll do is just do something. Just do something, even if it's a tiny watercolor and you think to yourself, oh God, this is so insignificant. I'm doing a 2-inch watercolor the size of 2 postage stamps. You know, it's like I'm 12 years old again. Well, so what? I'm actually making something. I've got a tiny sketchbook and 1 brush and some water and a little tiny watercolor palette, and that's enough. That is all you need to make art. When people say to me, oh, I can't make art because I haven't got time or space, I say, no, there's simply excuses, because you can make art with on a kitchen table with 20 minutes in the evening. That's all you need. Make a tiny watercolor, put 3 squares together, and that's a piece of artwork. Just make something, and that's the start. And then the next night you'll say, oh, I'm going to elaborate on that. So to me, that's the inspiration. When I'm stuck, I'll just make something, and that will get me moving again.
I love that. That's so true. And I think we can all relate to that. Once you get going, you know, just make something.
Just make something.
That's
It's
why I
really
like
good.
to try new recipes.
Yeah, cooking's the same. Cooking.
Yeah,
I do a lot of cooking as well, and cooking
Yeah.
is like that for me as well. Just try something new.
yeah,
It doesn't always work out, but
no. It's still fun.
still fun. Exactly. Cooking's very creative activity, I think. Absolutely.
So this has been wonderful to have you. And does anybody have any other comments? We need to wrap it up. It's getting near noon. Well, wonderful comments in here. I think everybody has loved your talk, and thank you, Andy, for rising to the occasion and doing this over Zoom. And we did it. You did a great presentation.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you, Terry, for reaching out to me. And I was, you know, delighted to hear from you again after all these years. And thank you for guiding me through it and helping with the practice sessions. And it all came together nicely, I think.
It did. It did.
Yeah.
So we will be putting this recording on our YouTube channel fairly soon. And so the link will be on our webpage, and you can listen to just the first half or the second half or the whole thing if you want to. And one other comment I wanted to say, I love how you're using the vintage linen book covers to mount your work. I was like, that is so cool. How
Yeah,
are you
it's
using
nice.
the covers?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
nice thing to do, just finding different ways to mount work and not always have to use expensive, you know, card books that you buy in the art store. I mean, you can just go to the thrift store. In fact, for painting, I think go to the thrift store and buy really old books that nobody's going to read anymore.
Right.
And rip out the pages and do your paintings on those. Much more fun and interesting.
Great idea. I love that.
Bobby, how can I have a little bit of time to read these comments before we close up?
Well, I was going to say for everybody, I can print them out, but when you have your chat open, anybody can look at the chat, and you should see, I think, 3 little dots, and it will allow you to save the chat to your computer. So anybody can do this on anything. So you should be able to just do save chat, and it'll save it all on there. So you've gotten some very nice
Great. Where can I do-
comments too, Andy.
Yes, where do I do save chat?
Well, I'll send it to you if
Oh,
you
you'll
can't
send it
do
to
it.
me. Okay.
It
All
should
right, thank you.
should say there. And one more thing I forgot to say is, well, we hope he teaches a collage class. Our next meeting is October 14th, our next Paperworks meeting. And tonight, David Andres from Pima said there is the opening of the Luis Carlos Bernal reception is tonight from 5 to 7 p.m. And there'll be music and refreshments outside. And the show is called Egress. And that's tonight, if anybody wants to go to a real live art opening in person.
Is that at the art museum?
No, this is at Pima College, the West Campus.
Okay, the West Campus. Okay, thank you.
Carlos Bernal Gallery.
Yeah. you.
So that's tonight from 5 to 7. And I'll stay
Bobby,
on the
can I say
line if
one
it,
more thing? Can I say one more
Yes,
thing?
yes.
I have a few copies left on my website of a little book of abstract paintings and collages that I made. That's a lovely little book, and there's a few copies left on my website if anybody wants to go to andyburgessart.com.
wonderful. And we'll put the link also in our e-news too, and on our webpage, so people can go. Too bad you didn't talk in person, because then you could have brought some
I
of
know.
this,
Next-
which would have been
next
nice.
time.
So.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay, well, I'm going to end the meeting. I'll stay on for a few minutes if anybody wants to chat, but I'm going to stop the record. And